Hello and welcome to the Silverman Show. I'm your host Ilene, and on this week's program, our guests, members of the Jewish Council of North Central Florida, Abe Goldman and Kenneth Wald, discuss the upcoming Holocaust Remembrance event featuring Guy Stern, German Jewish refugee whose parents sent him to the United States to escape the Nazis and later served in World War II as a Ritchie boy. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Thanks for joining us for our program. I'm very pleased to introduce our guests, Abe Goldman and Kenneth Wald, both University of Florida emeritus professors, members of the Jewish Council of North Central Florida, and second-generation Holocaust survivors. And Abe and Ken, it's wonderful to have you join us and to have this opportunity to talk about the Holocaust Remembrance Program. And I appreciate our long friendships. And to get us going, tell us, Abe, when the Holocaust Remembrance event will take place.
Well, this year it will be on Sunday, May 1st, starting at 7 p.m. At Congregation B'nai Israel, which is on 16th Avenue. And it will probably take between an hour and a half or so.
Okay. And once again, sponsored by the Jewish Council of North Central Florida. So Ken, just briefly, what is that organization?
Well, the Jewish Council has existed under various names since the 1970s. And our major function is, first of all, to provide programming for the Gainesville community, and secondly, to raise funds for philanthropic causes for the Jewish community, but also for other catastrophes around the world. The Holocaust Memorial Ceremony is one of the programs that we've been doing now for 25 years.
Right. Good record, and has evolved over these many years, and I'm looking forward to being a part of it. It's always a very moving ceremony, and it is called the Yamaha Shoah service or ceremony or program, and what does that really mean, Abe?
Well, Yom HaShoah is the Hebrew term, which means Yom means day, and HaShoah is the Hebrew name for the Holocaust, which engulfed most of the Jewish population of Europe as well, and killed over 6 million, but also killed, aside from combat death, also killed probably 5 million or so other civilians, including gypsies, Romani, the homosexuals, disabled people,
Right.
and members of other nationalities who were civilians and were executed by the Nazis, sometimes by other groups as well. And it was a massive catastrophe in European and in world history.
And certainly diminished a large portion of the Jewish population of Eastern Europe, kind of where we're all from, actually.
Enormously, yeah.
And yes, and we share that. And in the event and the ceremony, as we look forward to it, Ken, what are some of the basics of the evening when we're all there?
Well, there are a number of components to the event itself. The one that I think most people find most moving is the lighting of candles. We light 7 candles during the evening, and each of the candle lighters, particularly of the first 6, is somebody who lost family during the Holocaust. The seventh candle, which was suggested by Elie Wiesel many years ago, was to recognize people from groups that have been experiencing mass murder on an enormous scale. So this year, for example, our seventh candlelighter is somebody whose family comes from the Ukraine to acknowledge the losses that have been suffered in the conflict with Russia.
Yes, and that candlelight service is quite meaningful. There are prayers that are a part of it, and we're going to speak more about this, but we're going to take a quick break, and then we'll come back and discuss it more in depth. Stay with us. We'll be right back. We're back talking about the Holocaust Remembrance Program. And Abe and Ken, thank you for explaining about the candles and the seventh candle. And of course, a highlight is our featured speaker. So, and we've had many wonderful speakers over the years. Of course, Abe, as you were mentioning, we're losing survivors because of age and the years that have passed since World War II. But this will be, I think, a very special gentleman that we'll be able to hear from. So tell us more about that.
Well, we're going to hear a recorded address by a man named Guy Stern from Detroit, Michigan. And Guy turns out to have been, during World War II, one of the many German-born Jews who were selected into the U.S. intelligence service, the first military intelligence unit, which was trained for the most part at Camp Ritchie in Maryland. So Guy is known as a Ritchie boy.
Right.
And their job was to collect battlefield intelligence that would enable the U.S. to prosecute the war more effectively with a minimum loss of American life. And most of the German-speaking Ritchie boys were German Jews. And they had an insight. They spoke German, of course, fluently.
Right.
They often spoke Russian, but they understood German culture in a way that nobody who learned German as a second language could gather.
Right. You couldn't teach that.
Absolutely
They'd
not.
come to America escaping the Nazis and...
Yeah, and to be frank, they all could be relied upon because they'd all been persecuted in
Exactly.
Germany. Many of them had family who were being
Perished
killed
completely.
or murdered. And so for them, this was a way to fight back against something they had not been able to fight when they were part of a small minority in Germany. And they did some amazingly imaginative things that Guy will tell us about. And a military historian at West Point has said that they provided the most important battlefield intelligence of any unit during World War II.
Yeah.
And
I
there
mean,
were,
it's amazing because
Yeah.
it was a secret for so long.
it was a secret until the 1990s. And it turns out there were Ritchie boys who were native Italian speakers. There were Ritchie boys who were native Japanese speakers. And they, for the most part, of course, did not come from the Jewish community. But they played very similar roles. And together, they were an astonishing success in saving the lives of American soldiers.
Right. I mean, from starting with D-Day going onward, it's a fascinating history, what I've read about, of all the battles that they influenced, and that they were right there, and interrogating German prisoner of wars. And I mean, it's just a fascinating, the training that it took for someone to be a Ritchie boy was enormous. And they are credited with really, changing the war.
Yeah, yeah. And again, they weren't known about because their information was classified until we
Right.
think the 1990s. So it's only in the past 20 or 30 years or so that we've
That we've
learned
learned their
about
story.
them. And the number of surviving Ritchie boys is, of course, dwindling because of the
Right.
time as well. But thanks to people like Guy Stern, we now know the story. And
Right.
again, I think the audience will be astonished at the things that the Ritchie boys managed to learn. At a time when
agree.
most people thought German POWs would not talk. But again, they understood the German mentality, the Ritchie boys did, and so they were
They
able to
knew
use it very
the keys.
effectively.
Yeah, they knew what to say and what to do,
Yeah.
even if it was to sort of share cigarettes and to share kind of a common feeling that why are we at this war anyway?
Yeah.
We just need to get out of this war.
And they were very good and very proud of the fact that they never had to use violence to get
Right.
information. They found it was much more effective to befriend the person, as you say, to share a sense of we're in this together, let's get it over with. People were much more willing to talk than they would have been with a more aggressive interrogation approach.
I agree. And we have much more to say. Abe and I we're fascinated. Okay. Stay with us. We'll be right back. We're back discussing the Yamaha Shoah event with Abe Goldman and Kenneth Wald. And we were talking about the featured speaker that will be part of May 1st, Guy Stern. And tell us a little more about him. And actually, he's not actually physically going to be with us on May 1st.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
there's
well,
reasons.
Most of the last 25 years when we've had these annual events, we have had speakers in person. Some of them incredibly memorable.
Yes.
Many of them. Now, Guy Stern is not coming because he's over 100 years old. But he is such a lively person. He is a
Still
delight
got spark
to
and
see.
spunk.
Yeah. And Ken has had numerous interactions with him.
Tell us about him.
Yeah, he once curated an exhibit on the Ritchie boys at the Holocaust Museum in Detroit when I happened to be spending a semester in the vicinity. I called him up, told him that I was interested. We made an appointment, and he took me around the entire exhibit. He explained every item that was in it, and he
Amazing.
showed me things that were not on display. And he had the energy and enthusiasm that, I wish I had today, let alone
I understand.
back then.
I understand. Yes.
He is a remarkable man, and it's not surprising that he became a leader just by the force of his personality. People are going to love to hear him speak, as well as hear what he has to say.
And I agree. And his backstory, like you both have such your own story of your family history and the Holocaust, and that he was the only one of his family selected to come to the United States at age 15 and not just survived as he did, losing all members of his family, but thriving, as you said, to become the person that we get to hear speak. And
he's also an emeritus professor of literature.
See, you share something right there.
That's right.
And actually, you share a lot more, Ken, with Guy Stern being a Ritchie boy, because you have your own story of your family that involves your father, Henry Wald, and you've been on our show several times about your family's history, and each time it has been, fascinating and enthralling.
I learned about the connection in a very roundabout way. In 1986, I was back in my hometown of Lincoln, Nebraska, preparing for the funeral of my father. And a member of the congregation, the Jewish synagogue there, pulled me aside and said, I want to tell you a story that your father told to me. And he said that your father told me he never told you this story. There was a German POW being interrogated at a camp in Germany. And he was being interrogated by an American who was wearing the uniform of the U.S. Army and a captain's insignia. And as the interview proceeded, the POW, the German, couldn't understand how this American soldier spoke perfect German, the accent, the grammar, everything. And he just found it remarkable. And then, as the questions that this interrogator asked got more and more specific about the area of Germany where he lived, where the prisoner lived, the prisoner thought, well, only somebody who's been there, has lived there, will know this. And he just kept staring at the interrogator, and finally he said, wait a minute, I know you. You're the Schenwald boy. Now, Schenwald is my father's original name.
Right.
He dropped the Shen when he entered the U.S. Army, actually. But that is how I first was told that my father was engaged in interrogations. And I have to point out, I didn't believe the story.
I remember you saying, you said cannot be true.
Yeah, it just was too unlikely, and my father could embellish his story. Well, a lot of things happened, but fast forward to the year 2008. I had just returned from Germany, where my father's hometown had unveiled a monument to my grandparents who were murdered during the Holocaust. My friend there, who had led this effort, a Lutheran pastor, got a call from an elderly member of a man in the town who had been a member of the German army before World War II, and he said, "I have a story I want you to hear, Pastor." Well, when they got together, the elderly man told my father exactly the story that you just heard.
Yes.
He was the man who my father interrogated.
This is amazing.
And I later got a copy of his interrogation from the National Archives, and there's a space on the form where the interrogator could fill in notes. They didn't, of course, give their name, but my father had a very distinctive form of printing, and my wife, who was looking over my shoulder as I was opening this, said, "That's Henry's writing."
That's Henry's writing.
And then we learned from the same pastor that he found another man in a few towns away who my father had also interrogated and who told him that they both had gone to the same school. So it turns out my father was trained in interrogation both at Stanford University and for a short time at Camp Ritchie.
That is quite a history. Thank you for sharing that. We're going to just take another quick break. Stay with us. We'll be right back. We're back talking about the Yamaha Shoah event coming up on May 1st. And Abe and Ken, everyone who attends will, I think, feel very privileged to hear the presentation with Guy Stern, because he's an outstanding gentleman. Tell us a bit more.
Well, Guy is a person who would never call himself a survivor. That's not a term. And one of the things I like about having him speak this year is that we normally focus on speakers who talk about loss and the powerlessness experienced by Jews and how they were unable to avert this tragedy. And those are all important topics. But what we see in Guy is how some Jews fought back, how these young German Jews who were brutalized while they still lived in Germany under the Nazis came to the U.S., enlisted in the military, and performed dangerous and important service, which helped save the lives of many of their fellow Americans.
Well said. I think, yes, we owe Guy Stern and the Ritchie boys a huge debt of gratitude for their service and the way they felt about America coming to this country and all that they did for us. And in this Yamaha Shoah event, we talked about the seventh candle, the sixth to remember the 6 million Jews lost during the Holocaust, World War II. But that seventh candle, Abe, talk about that again, please.
Yes, we've tried very hard to make sure that is always a part of our commemorative event. It's often said, I mean, one of the watchwords of looking back on the Holocaust, that we often try to say, never again. But unfortunately, even before and certainly since the Holocaust, since World War II, there have been all too many events of mass murder and of genocide in a few cases. Genocide is a term that was just actually coined in 1944, as it happened, by a Polish lawyer named Raphael Lemkin. And it refers to the deliberate murder of a group of people by other forces, but targeting and murdering, as well as committing a whole range of other outrages, often rape and numerous other offenses, against a group of people merely because they belong to that group of people. merely because of their identity. And so our seventh candle is one way of acknowledging, regrettably, sadly, that these events continue to happen. And over the last few years, we've had candles, and we've had representatives from our community, from Gainesville
Right.
and the surrounding communities, to acknowledge the murders of people in Syria, in Yemen, in Bosnia, in South Sudan, and in Sudan, in a number of other cases, including, and a couple of years ago we had one who was the grandchild, I think, of a survivor of Rosewood, just
Right.
in our neighborhood.
Part of our history.
And very regrettably, I mean, this is continuing today. I mean,
Yes.
these episodes of mass murder, in the most extreme sense, which the Holocaust represented, and several other events in the 20th century also represented, it is the deliberate attempt to exterminate a whole group of people, not merely to kill large numbers and quell a movement of some kind, or to force them out of an area, a term that we now use that refers to that as ethnic cleansing, which came really from the Yugoslav civil war in Bosnia and Kosovo and elsewhere. But you know, that most extreme version of this occurred at least 3 times in the 20th century, with the Armenian genocide from 1915 to about 1920 or so, the Holocaust and the extermination, the attempted extermination, not just of Jews in Germany, but of Jews throughout Europe
Exactly.
and elsewhere, had that been possible for the Nazis. And then in 1994, the attempted extermination of the Tutsi portion of the population of Rwanda, where at least 800,000 people were killed in roughly about 6 months, which was another horrible, horrible event. And so these events, sadly, have not
they've not stopped.
disappeared. Other events of lesser magnitude or lesser severity
Right.
also continue, and those are among the things that we
want
try to make sure that we acknowledge when we hold
Yes.
our Holocaust remembrance.
We will all think of that. Thank you, Abe. We will think of that when the 7th candle is being lit. And I want to thank you both for sharing such important information. I look forward to joining with our whole community on Sunday, May 1st, Congregation B'nai Israel, 7 p.m. for the Yamaha Shoah event. Thank you, and the Jewish Council of North Central Florida.
Thank you, Eileen.
Thank you for having us.
Our pleasure. And I'm so glad that you tuned in, and I hope you'll join us next week. Take care.